Welcome to the Second Renaissance podcast, where we decode the rebirth of human creativity in a technology-driven world. I'm Sorman-Nilsson, global futurist, author, and the co-creator of the Adobe CQ, the IQ test for your creative leadership, and your host for the Second Renaissance. So I'm sitting here with Elise Pioch Balzac. Welcome to the Second Renaissance.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you on the show. And as you can probably hear already, you've got a wonderful Australian-French lilt to your accent.
Yeah, I would say French-Australian.
French-Australian, Australian-French.
Because I can hear it so much. But yeah, I'm French background. Yeah.
And I'm Swedish-Australian or Australian-Swedish, depending on who's doing better at the Winter Olympics. So we can shift these things around a little bit.
Yeah, as it suits.
Yeah. Welcome back to Australia, I should say, as well.
Yeah.
You've had this sort of globe-trotting life where you've spent a lot of time, obviously, in your home country of France. And then you moved, by the sounds of it, to Australia in around 2004 after leaving
Paris.
Hermès.
Yes, exactly.
Paris, yeah. What brought you to Australia, first of all?
Well, I was working for Hermès for many, many years, fresh out of fashion school in Paris. That was my first official role in the fashion world and in one of the most honorable house, I would say. And after 3-4 years dealing with these exceptional products, exceptional designers, at the time Martin Margiela was designing, so he was a proper hero of mine for his very intellectual fashion. And then after so many years being there in what I felt like a golden tower, I really had this urge to set myself free from that golden cage and just travel the world to see if really we were doing the best product with the best message in the best way. And so I took a flight to Melbourne in 2004, and what I thought would be a 3-month adventure just to change my perspective on France and luxury and all of that became a proper love affair with Australia as a whole. And then 3 months later, my plane took off without me in it. And I always think of that empty seat in that plane that left. So a part of me, I think, went back to France, but the better of me stayed in Australia.
Yeah.
And that's been, that was 17 years ago, actually, this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you spent several years in Australia as a fashion buyer, from what I understand.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. That was brilliant because by exporting myself, that allowed me to actually try my chance in a different role, because at Hermès I was in the public relations department looking after all the fashion show, the dossier de presse, so the press release and the voice of the brand. But I was very interested in the product itself. So by being a fashion buyer, I could get closer to my passion, which is a numeric passion. I love analytical. I love analyzing creativity. But I also have that immense imagination on the other side of the brain. So as a buyer, I was using both every day. So it felt like the perfect role for me. But I don't think that if I had stayed in France, I would have had such a logical progression between PR and buying. But by moving country, that really started like fresh for me. And just my background and my enthusiasm was enough for them to give me a chance. And I think that's typical to Australia, actually, to give people a chance, even if I didn't have experience in the buying world. Although I had a degree in it, I didn't have experience in it, but they still gave me a chance. So I was a buyer and traveling the world for about 6 years, and then going back to France twice a year, which was very pleasant to reconnect with my culture, and that stopped 7 years ago now. And
it's a culture as you combine the kind of the art and the science, I guess, of business and creativity. It sounds like there's a data-based approach to your own creativity. But essentially, this eventually landed in the the birth or the sort of embryonic stages of what is now Maison. Balzac, which is of course your homeware brand.
No, you're right. Actually.
And we're surrounded here by beautiful Maison Balzac glassware, for
Colourful.
example.
Yes.
Yeah, from the wonderful store, one of your retail partners, Studio by Elias.
Oh, yes, beautiful. Yeah, so proud to be actually referenced by such amazing creative themselves, because they put their own vision on my brand every time, and so it's super exciting to see how they treat it.
Yeah, and so just explore. I mean, I'm always fascinated in in people who picked up sticks, as they would say in the cricket world or in the Commonwealth, and ventured to the other side of the world, and certainly leaving one's country behind is apparently from an entrepreneurial and business school perspective one of the best predictors of entrepreneurship, because it's one of the riskiest things we can do to leave our family behind, leave the smells, the scents, the feelings, the sounds of our of where we grew up. But it seems with the birth of Maison Balzac that you've taken a lot of the best of France, brought it out to Australia. Now, of course, you're exporting all over the world.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that really resonates with me, what you just said, because I feel like we all have a certain familiarity with the background that is linked to our upbringing. I'm sure for you in Sweden, there are certain light and smells and insects, noises that to you is like second nature. It's become familiar. And it feels like in my life, every time things become a bit too familiar, I need to sort of put myself into a risky position again. And it seems to be my character, my personality, but I never thought that was me, because I've always been quite reserved and shy, but I've got that drive behind me that pushed me to go outside of my comfort zone continuously. But what's funny is that then when I move on, I recreate that, because you can't help, as part of life, every day you reconnect with your new familiarity, which is, let's say, around here is the sound of the crickets and the sound of cockatoos and the kookaburra. That's my new familiarity. Which
is, of course, the local area here around
of Sydney, and
of Avalon Beach, Elvina Bay, Pittwater.
Exactly, yeah. So that's my new familiar, and but that one seems to be something that I finally found a huge resonance with, and so I'm not ready to move on anytime soon.
Good, we've still got you here for a little bit.
Yeah.
So you like, I'm always curious to see, and just like as you're talking about childhood and nature, and like I literally have, I think, some synapses like shooting off information and memories in my brain, because I can still remember the smell of the pine forests in Sweden. I think even more strongly now that I'm a father as well, and how they smell on a sunny day, and they're very rare in Swedish summer, but when they do exist, just smelling the pine cones under the heat, and walking up this little, what seemed then an eternal sort of ascent up a country road into this forest that is very close to where my grandparents had a little summer house. Those memories are just like firing.
Engraved. Yeah.
And I guess this is, I guess also one of the senses that you create for is our sense of smell, which I understand is one of the strongest in the human.
Yeah, well, I guess when I was 7-8 years ago, I had been in Australia for 8 years, and France was starting to really call me. I had this longing for all these familiar natural elements. And then I decided to recreate them here through the medium of wax and perfume. I wanted to stay in Australia because I feel this is my happy place, but I still had that need to surround myself with the familiar perfumes and retell my childhood and my upbringing that I had through 5 fragrances. It started like that. And it was a typical Sunday when I was 8 years old, which would start in the morning with a freshly orange juice by my mum. So the first candle was Le Soleil with orange blossoms in it. And then the second one was the smell of a church, because my grandmother was very religious. She would take me to church every Sunday morning. So like the smell of snuffed candles and humidity and cold stones. So that was l'église. And then after lunch, which is always huge on a Sunday in France. We had to go and have a big walk to sort of digest the food. So the third candle was called Le Bois, the forest, and he recreated all the smell of the forest that I think you're talking about, so in Sweden. And then in the afternoon, actually end of day, I would cross my garden to go into my grandmother's garden, which was full of roses. That was the fourth candle, called La Rose. And then I would head to my grandmother's because she would pour me a lavender bath every Sunday evening. And so the fifth candle was the lavender, Le Sud. And these 5 typical moments of a Sunday, it made me feel so happy to be able to recreate them, but also to share them with people, for them to create their own memories with it. And just as an example, I have a friend who on the day on her wedding, she picked Le Sud, the lavender one, for her wedding. So that became her wedding memory. And so for the next 80 years, that will be her memory. So I love, you are just I think as a creator, you just provoke a little moment that then people catch and make their own. And so this is what I love doing. It's like gifting a starting point for people to create their own memories.
Wow. So, I mean, there seems to be almost this, this creative spark, and just thinking about the sort of the cadence of a Sunday from when you were 8, that then, several years later actually sort of was the embryonic stage of the first essences that you created.
30 years later, it was still vivid in my mind. So you're right when you say that sense of smell is so potent. And sometimes it brings you back to places that you don't even know where they are, but your brain knows, and it makes you look for it. And that inquisition as well is very fascinating, I find.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because when we think about creativity or creative expression, innovation, entrepreneurship, it's so often about, do something totally new.
Yep.
Whereas what I'm kind of hearing is that it's
it's a nostalgia.
Yeah. It's the echo of your childhood in a sense that.
Completely. It's going backwards, but with a very fresh outlook, because the packaging are fun. It's very playful. But you're right, it's based on all that past that I have accumulated. It's memories there that I really want to share, recreate, bring back, and then also tell my daughter, who is 7 actually. And I continuously think about, what is she building up now that she will use as an adult? What is she going to make of it?
So her experiences now, you guys having moved back again from the south of France, and we might talk about that creative chapter of your life as well. But what are the kind of smells and sounds and kinesthetic associations or influences that you think might shape her?
Well, it's funny because she's born at the same time as Maison Balzac, and so she grew up with all this smell, and she can pick any candle of my range, and she recognizes who they are, and she gives this to friend and says, smell this. So from a very early age, I think she's been bathing in my own fragrance. But also my husband and I, we're extremely close to nature, so we always have either a herb garden or we go for bushwalk, and we always crush leaves and smell. And I really want to bring her awareness on all of that, because you can go on a walk and not notice anything, or you could go on a walk and notice everything. So that's what we want her to learn, is to actually look, listen, and smell. And I remember, because in a previous life, I was a primary school teacher, and we went on an excursion as teachers with very young kids. They were 5. And we all sat down in the forest, and the exercise was to actually identify 3 noises that were, one was very far and one was very close, and one was just one we could hear on top of that. And every time I go out, I'll try to focus on at least 3 noises, and there is always more than that. But just, to bring you the present at that very moment, to really detect and be careful to what surrounds you. I think she'll be very good at that, because if you taught this from a very early age. So I guess her perfumes and her scent and embryon of creativity are the one that we have here at the moment around Sydney and the water. And when we were in France for 2 years, it was my parents' garden and the little fresh, cherry tomatoes that he was picking. And when we're scaling a fish as well, that smell of the guts and the slimy skin, and anything animal or fauna or flora relating is definitely part of a childhood, I think.
And so I'm curious then, when so you created Maison Balzac, and at the same time something was pulling you back towards your childhood in the south of France in Béziers. And you guys had built up something pretty amazing here in Australia. I have to share, a quick anecdote, which is that this beautiful l'église or church that you and Pablo Chapel, your husband, took over as a massive renovation project, was where many years ago, I think back in 2014 or 2015, we did a fashion shoot for my mother's Stockholm-based menswear store because we just thought it was the perfect setting. I bought a bunch of clothes out from her shop in Sweden in 2 big suitcases because the seasons just worked. It's good to shoot in Australia and then get the shots early, and that was a huge project. 2 creatives, both of you are entrepreneurs and innovators in your own right, and you created you created this place where I've been told that many of your friends have since gotten engaged, etc. And then at one stage you guys kind of went, let's again pick up sticks and go back to France.
That's true. Yeah, that was our first home together. It took 9 years to bring it to a level that we felt was comfortable. And then that's when I felt like I needed to go back to France for a few years because the church was finished. Maison Balzac was doing very well, but I was missing my family, and Lulu, our daughter, was 4. And I felt like if she didn't have that injection of Frenchness inside her at that age, she wouldn't remember it. It wouldn't be part of her growing up. So we sold the church, and that was I cried so much. Pablo also cried, but somehow it felt like the right thing to do as well, to move forward. And then so for 2 years we went back to France, and we bought a new home in France that again needed a lot of love. So we took 2 years to bring it to a level as well that house was spectacular to start with, but was a bit tired. And then after 2 years, we felt, okay, that one is finished. And actually, where are we the happiest? Now we had a reason to compare because we had been living in the 2 countries together as a family. And the answer was obvious. It was Australia. So we got back, and that was 1.5 years ago. And now we got a new home. That's the 3rd one we have. 3rd chapter. 3rd Renaissance for us.
Yes, 3rd Renaissance, yes.
And yes, early stages, but really, really looking forward to the future in this new period of our life.
Now, I mean, it seems like you and Pablo tend to take on these, renovation projects, which, our generation gets... Oftentimes I hear from parents or grandparents, etc. They say, we used to, take on renovation projects and do it yourself, and now no one does it. But you guys kind of prove them wrong. Yeah. And I know that, we both share this love for pit water and on
the water,
and on New Year's Day, have fond memories of you and Pablo and Lulu picking us up to go back. To for a little bit of a spin on pit water in a boat you guys are also renovating, which is an old ferry from Cockatoo Island.
That's right, 1927.
So you guys are always tinkering, and then is there a sort of a cadence to giving something a renaissance or a revival, and then moving on or closing that chapter, or is there? What do you think it is about the sort of, giving everything your love for a certain period of time and then kind of going, actually, we brought that to sort of perfection. Someone else gets to take that on. What are the feelings and thoughts that go into that?
Yeah, I think it comes down a lot to Pablo, who is the driving force of all these projects, because Pablo is an industrial designer. So he's got that mindset that he understands how things work mechanically. And as you were saying, that technology can help people being creative. In the case of Pablo, he knows what tool can get him to the exact result that we need to. And when he doesn't know, he goes online and finds the answers. So there is nothing too difficult for him. He knows that he can do anything. And when he was fresh out of industrial design school, graduated, his final year project was to build the first solar panel scooter in the world, because he's a bit of a hippie just at heart. Like, he doesn't look like a hippie, but he really wants to save the planet, and he's really angry at the amount of waste we are creating, while there are so many old beauties that exist that only need a bit of restoration to be perfectly functioning again, and in most times function better than newer version of them. And that's why the ferry came about, 1927, original Cockatoo Island ferry that was taking 6 workers a day from the Sydney harbour to the other side to Cockatoo Island to build Cockatoo Island. Before that, we had a Harvison boundary that was just an empty shell, and Pablo researched to bring back the inside identical to what it used to be. The church as well was 1880. The bell had been stolen, so he tracked down the original bell, and we had it recasted, to the original. So we love things, even with cars. He loves Jaguar because they build so well. These engines, they just never die, and inside the design as well of the car is beautiful. And in a way, he prefers to drive a Jaguar, even if it uses a lot of petrol, rather than having a manufacturer making a new car that takes a considerable amount of energy and time and waste to build new cars. So that cycle of life. And as you said, because he's got that talent to get something from the brink of sinking or being crushed to being used again and loved by a family, once this is done, he loves giving the keys of this to someone who's going to continue keeping it to that level, but these people might not have had the skills to bring it from where it was to where it is now. So we love just passing on this project. And funny enough, every time we sell these things, they stay with us. Like, I feel like I still own the church, I still own the French house, I still own Bindery, because you throw so much of your love, and you know that you've helped something continue life in the future. And most times we find like-minded people, we meet, and sometimes they become friends, the new owners, because we share that same passion for appreciation of an old thing that's become new and beautiful again.
And I think, even the term Renaissance stands for rebirth or revival. And even if we cast our minds or our forebears' minds back to the Dark Ages or the Black Plague, that was the precursor to the birth of the rebirth.
Yes.
Petrarch and other thinkers at the time rediscovered all of these old texts, ancient texts, and they sort of said, "Hey, we were more advanced a few thousand years ago.
Exactly.
Let's actually use it to stage a rebirth of the art and sciences and creative thought, etc." And so it seems like you guys are sort of on a similar path in terms of...
Exactly. Because, when you think of Renaissance, most time it's seen as an advance, from Dark Age to New Age and sort of modernity. But also really at the bottom of Renaissance was, at the roots of Renaissance was that inspiration from the antique world, antiquity, how do you say, the Greek and the Romans, how they were doing things. And it was that nostalgia from the past that helped them and lead them into a new future. So you're right, it's just,
and it's this sort of connection of past, present, and future. And I think, and it's a wonderful statement in terms of sustainability as well, that, we can always upcycle, recycle,
everything,
and repurpose things as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious, your surname, Balzac, and which is, of course, also the name of your homewares brand. It's also something that is sort of an ode to tradition and your own grandparents, from what I understand.
Yeah, exactly. So my mom is called Nadine Balzac. Her parents were Janine and André Balzac, and so on. And I find it's such a venerable name to start with, because it's Honoré de Balzac was a very famous French writer that was born in 1799, and died in 1850, and he had a massive influence on the French literature of the 19th century. So when you carry that name, you always, people ask, are you connected, are you related? And we actually had a desk that belonged to the Balzac original family, and a letter as well that said that we belong to the family. And I've looked at all the the tree, how do you say in English, genealogy?
I understand.
The
family tree, yes.
And that it blocks at a certain point, so there is no official connection. But somehow, of like my mum has always won poetry, prizes, and I've always had this thing for words as well, and for stories, for telling stories. And somehow, you make your own reality sometimes, and I feel like carrying that name made me want to, or made me very I wanted to make that name proud of me. And so I've always loved telling stories, writing imaginary friends, and so I think with my brand, it's the first time, it's a massive playground to imagine values and future and a whole story that I can bring to life and share with an audience.
So, I mean, storytelling and provenance and family business, and I grew up in one, can be really kind of powerful. How do you find? I mean, you sort of you spend a lot of time in the in the aesthetic, in the fashion industries, etc. What role has stories and the capturing of people's imaginations in Australia and around the world? What role does story play in terms of your products and branding? Why people are
I think
attracted?
Story is everything as long as it's genuine. And I learned this at Hermes, because the brand started in 1827 by the Hermes family, and it's always been an evolution based on their love of horses to start with. So they were making saddle, but then the evolution from horse to cars meant that the people who used to buy saddles from them now were driving cars, and they needed leather gloves to drive the cars, scarf to protect their neck, and that's how all their category of products came about, because there was a proper need and they were following their customers' needs. But now you fast forward 2004, when I was in the company, every single of these products was still in existence and had a genuine history and a genuine relevance to the brand. So when I started to imagine what my brand would be, I wanted to have that same kind of grounding into the reality, which is, yes, with this brand, I'm only talking about the memories I have from my grandparents, Janine and André Balzac. I was with them all the time. They had a beautiful interior. It's not because they were wealthy, but they had a sense of balance, a sense of aesthetic as well, that I really want to recreate. So that story is mine. It's a true one. And also I believe that in the future, as my business evolves, it's really easy to dig into that, to stay consistent, to have sort of a highway of possibilities that always relate back to your real story. So it's absolutely everything to have a good one.
I mean, I find both of those narratives really interesting, and I guess there's always this sense in when people talk about innovation and entrepreneurship and agility and adapting with the times, etc. People oftentimes go, if we just asked people back in the 1910s, 1920s, what would you like, in terms of the future of transport, people would have said, I just want a faster horse.
Yeah, exactly.
But then, the industrial designers of the era, including Ford, etc., went, no, we're creating something, paradigmatically different. And then as a result of that, people also kind of go, people that were in the, horse buggy or buggy whip, they were producing buggy whips, they had a really tough time, adapting. But your story there from Hermes is that they went, okay, saddle making might not be the thing, but we can take the skills we have in that sort of artisanal space and innovate with the times nonetheless. And I guess the equestrian part of the brand still carries on even in the way that we experience it today.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I think adaptability, flexibility, and really the finger on the pulse is the key to making sure your business has got a future. And just as an anecdote as well, I don't know if you know, but the orange color of the Hermes boxes, which is so emblematic, and they wouldn't change it for anything in the world, only came about because during the Second World War, they had to place a new order for boxes and the orange paper ran out and there was nowhere to get orange paper anymore. Sorry, the brown, because their color was brown. It was brown boxes. And then the only color left in stock in the shop during war was orange. And they said, look, okay, we'll take orange then. So it wasn't intentional, but they also accepted the change. They went with it and it actually became a strength. So that's a very good lesson as well.
There you go. Now, my wife, Nicole, who you know well, one of her least favorite colors is orange. I shouldn't say this, given this, there's
yellow.
hues. It's yellow.
It's
okay.
yellow,
all right. There you go. She's the aesthetic one, not me. But orange, I like orange. I think it's a really strong color. And but anything that's orange in our home seems to end up in the pantry.
See?
But I think if there was an Hermes box, maybe she would make an exception.
That's the power of that color, right? With that brand association. They didn't want it either, They didn't want orange, but they had to, and then it became that thing.
There you go. That's a powerful story. And so your grandparents, they were in the scent business as well, if I understand correctly.
That's
or
right.
They had a perfumery.
That's
is that
it.
right?
Yeah. So my grandmother Janine, she decided to have a perfumery one day with my mum. So it was a mother-daughter affair. She opened in Agde, which was a small fishing village, and she was the first independent boutique in France to have the license to sell the Chanel perfumes. And in the evening, my grandmother was obsessed with fragrance and perfume and beauty. She was also a beautician, and she had something in her hand that when she did a facial to you, you walked away, you were glowing. It was a skill she had. But so her passion was perfume. So she had all these books explaining what each major perfume olfactive pyramid was, the top notes, the middle notes, the base notes, how it was created. And when I was going to her home and sleeping over at her house, in the evening, instead of having a children book, every evening she would read me a page of that perfumery book. So I knew all about Chanel No. 5, all the Shalimar Guerlain. And to me, they were stories. And I could picture in my head, the lemons and the mint and the ginger. And if I didn't know an ingredient, she would tell me. But I didn't make anything of it at the time. But then when at 36, you end up building your own fragrance house and company, and you don't know where it comes from, you just have to look back. And you've got these little signs spread out that when you make sense of it, it was obvious that I would do that. Now it's crystal clear, I think
they were handing on like the code of entrepreneurship.
That was my training.
And a beautiful marrying of, again, I guess, science and chemistry and artisanship as well.
Completely.
There seems to be, and I think for any successful business these days, that you can't just be about the creativity or the aesthetics without some basis in.
Yes.
There can't just be the right brain without the left brain, and not just the left brain without the right brain. And it seems to be something that is very true to both you and Pablo and what you guys co-create, but also what you do in Maison Balzac. How have you seen both, I guess, the marrying of your mathematical and logical brain sort of marry up with the aesthetic and the design aspects during the pandemic when, the world freaked out, people started spending more time at home. Did you guys have to change a lot, or did you guys see it as an opportunity that, hey, people might, start actually investing more in their, in their personal abodes, in their, in their private moats, etc.
Yeah. Well, look at the beginning when it started in March. We both got scared, I think, like the entire world. Because for about 2 weeks there was this floating moment that we had no idea what tomorrow would be made of. So that was the scary moment. But during that moment, we both realized that if ever we had built so far was failing, if Maison Balzac had to shut down, if Pablo work, as an industrial designer had to stop, if we had to sell the homes, we were completely ready to take on any challenges that this would present. And we knew that we could recycle ourselves in any field, any time. We felt very agile, very confident, because we had proven to ourselves that we could do these things already. So then from fear became that sense of letting go and accepting what's coming our way. And we were very open to change again. But I guess because our personality is not scared of change, we very quickly realized that it wasn't that scary.
So I'm just curious, so prior to that sort of acceptance or that, that spark of, hey, we can do this, and, your track record had shown that you could pivot and that you were agile and risk appetite. Was there a dark hour? Was there a time around a dinner conversation where you're like, oh my God, what's going to be?
Completely. We didn't discuss it. So I know my dark hour was about 2 days when at work I realized I was looking at my team and I thought, wow, I really enjoy working with you, but this is the end. That was all in my head. And that sense of like, when it's like when you pull the plug in the bath and the water goes out, I felt like my whole body was just emptying with everything I had built so far, all my hope, and also almost ashamed because, I hired them and I probably couldn't give them a future. So that was a panic moment, but I didn't share it with Pablo. I think unless really things seriously hit the fan, we don't actually panic or we don't share that panic mode. And Pablo is quite a cold-headed person. He's a rock, like he can deal with so much. So I don't know if he had that moment actually like I did of emptiness. I don't know. But after these 2 weeks basically, we started taking turn in the office because we didn't want to be together at the same time. And after 2 weeks, it became obvious that we had to go to work at the same time because the amount of online sales that came through was insane. It feels like people realizing that they were stuck at home. They still had a little bit of money. They didn't want to spend it on big things, but they wanted to have little things that could make their everyday a bit more pleasant. That was Maison Balzac. That's what we offer. It's just a carafe here and there, a little bit of incense, a little bit of fun. And then, so I guess after a month or two, we understood that pandemic was actually an incredible opportunity for us, but then kicked in the shame of that situation because that success, I understood very quickly, was pretty exceptional. And all our friends around us had very different experience where they had to close business down and they were relying on services more than products. So that was finished. And so I couldn't share actually that success and that happiness. And
talk us through that notion of shame. So doing well while
I know
things are looking shithouse for other.
I think it might be a French thing as well, that there is a lot of suspicion about success in France. I don't know if they realize that success usually goes hand in hand with a lot of hard work and a lot of risk because, I invested my own money. All the money I make, I reinvest in the brand. So it's not like I'm building my wealth. I'm literally building more product and more brand awareness. So that success I felt was it wasn't the right time to be successful, although it's literally, the business doubled in size in the worst period that the world has known in history, at least in this century. But now I've come to terms with that. And I think that I've always felt like I was an extremely lucky person, that I've got a lucky star that followed me everywhere. And I still believe there is luck sprinkled along the way of my path. at all time.
Mm.
But I also realized that every day as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, you have to take 1 million decisions a second. And you don't even realize you do. You know, when you answer an email, yes, no. When you sign off on a color, yes or no, or a shade, or volume of orders, the price, the negotiation, all of that. So this addition of little decision that you don't realize you make lead you where you are exactly at that moment. So yes, there is luck. Yes, there is that urge for people to decorate their home, but I had the right product, you know, it's really hard for me to say this to you, because to acknowledge that maybe I've done something right is very difficult. I really believe it's a lot of luck and a lot of coincidence.
Anyway, certainly it sounds like there's obviously a lot of empathy with, friends and yes. relatives and people in the greater community who've been doing
Impacted.
it really tough.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I wonder if growing up in Europe as well, there's even these words, right, in the English language of like profiteering, and I'm not accusing you of profiteering, but from the world wars, etc. I wonder if there's something cultural in Europe about that.
Oh yeah.
How do you think, if you guys were still living in the south of France, for example, do you think your sense of entrepreneurship or seizing opportunity, would it have looked different at all, do you think?
Completely different. When I had the idea of Maison Balzac 7 years ago, I told my parents and my best friends that were still in France, and they said, why would you make another candle? Do you know how many candle brands there are in the world? And they were like, don't do it. That was their advice. And then I would shut down the computer and then go on and share that same idea with my Australian friends. All of them were like, do it. And what can we do to help you?
Yeah.
In France, it's don't do it and don't even ask for help, because there is no future. And here was the exact opposite. And I think that pushed me to do it, because I knew I had people who believed in me and said that I could do it. And you can only go on with your projects when it's like that. And so when it started to be successful, my parents would say, we have no idea why it's successful. We still don't understand. Like, it doesn't make sense to us. And it's and
thanks, Mum and Dad.
I know.
Yeah.
But it forces you to be humble at all time as well, and to have your feet really on the ground. And I think it's 5 years into the business that my dad one day sent me an email and he said, I understand now. But it took him 5 years to understand that my concept as a brand was different from the others, and I had something to say that was personal. So I wouldn't have started Maison Balzac if I had been in France. When we returned to France and I was explaining what I was doing, people wouldn't take me seriously, because what is a candle and glassware brand? So I felt it again, and I thought, I need to escape this country, otherwise they're actually going to diminish even my self-confidence for what I'm doing. But if you are in a country like Australia, surrounded by very positive people that carry you, then you're flying.
And there's a phrase that I remember Nicole bringing back from an encounter with you, I think a business breakfast at one stage, where she started talking about the Maison, which I think is the French cultural sense of
non,
which essentially means
no.
But no.
It's the answer to every question. Mais non.
Yeah. Whereas in Australia, it's...
Mais oui.
Mais oui.
But yes.
Yeah.
And it's really funny, because at school also, Lulu comes back some days and on her hand, she's got a little sticker with a star saying, great effort today. And in France, as a kid, they only focus on what you've done bad on the day. And in Australia, they focus on what you've done good that day. And especially because she's struggled reading. But in reading, every time she can read a sentence while the others have read the book, they'll be like, well done, Lulu. Instead, in France, it would be, but the others have read the book. So, it's that highlight on what's wrong. Just all your life, that's what you focus on. That's what you train to look at. But here, you're trained to look at what you've done well. And that's why I want Lulu to grow up here.
So much more of an affirmative
emphasis on success,
and I guess building strength
and confidence.
Yeah. Whereas,
completely.
It's been said too that, if you spend your life always focusing on, your
on the bad.
weaknesses or your blind spots, then you'll be, and you focus on always improving those, then you'll be, decent at stuff you weren't very good at from the beginning. But if you can actually affirm and polish the things, your natural gifts.
Completely. And I think by creating Maison Balzac, it's like a therapy. It's my own therapy to prove to myself that I had qualities and that people respond to it positively. Every time we've got a new store or a new online sale or a new interview, like, for me to be here, that you're interested in what I have to say, Maison Balzac has taught me that was true. Before that, I would have never believed, because I grew up in that French environment.
And yet there's so many great parts of your French heritage that you, and influences that you bring, but then there's almost like the the entrepreneurship and that spirit. That's not is partly from this point, from the Antipodes here in Australia.
Right. And the fact that I'm French as well, I think, is a bonus. Like, it's a positive prerequisite. Every time I meet someone, there is that beautiful conception of how glorious France is, and I'm actually very proud to be French. I think in our education the content is really good, so we've got a broad culture, we touch on so much, and there is a sense of style as well that is very French. Things are a bit smaller. That's the biggest difference I find between Australia and France in terms of taste. Things are a bit more petite, elegant, delicate, small attention to detail, in the sense of colors, shape, and a way of thinking creatively that I'm very proud to have inherited. And that's why, actually, it's funny, I keep on going back to my daughter, but she lives in Australia, but she's going to a French school. It's because I really believe that the content is okay, but it's the way, it's the methodology that needs changing, and I hope it will. It will take a few generations, but
in terms of the content in pedagogy, or in terms of the education system?
What the pedagogy, I would say, in Australia, they try to be more Australian with their approach, which is good, but it's the actual, factual content of the education I quite like, and the exposure to all these artists and era and the Latin language and all of that structure your mind in a certain way.
Yeah, and I mean, language is so critical. It's the Austrian philosopher Ludwig von Wittgenstein, once said, "Whereof you cannot speak, you cannot think." And so language, if you don't have words for something, then you can't actually imagine the concept to the same degree, which is I always then switch to examples to concretize that that saying from Wittgenstein, which is some great words in the English language that we've imported because there's so many other cultural concepts from other parts of the world that that we import into the English language, whether it's like raison d'être or like reason for being, or Schadenfreude from German, which is literally the happiness in someone else's misery. And I spent time in Germany. I also went to a German speaking school in Sweden. So I understand that part of the German culture is that you can, and excuse this for, all the German viewers and listeners today. But there is a part of the Germanic culture that is, where the concept of, actually being happy in someone else's misery is a real thing. But in the English language, we had to import terminologies like that, or raison d'être from Swedish ombudsman, which is a super bureaucratic word. It's essentially an administrator in government. It's one of two Swedish words that have been imported into the English language. So it's ombudsman, which is essentially an administrator, and a sort of I think administrator would be the closest part, who kind of monitors. So we have like an ombudsman for equality and egalitarianism in Sweden. Ironically, that person, when they were recently appointed, and it was as a man who was the ombudsman for equality in Sweden. He got paid more than his female predecessor, so that was kind of interesting. Yeah. And then the second Swedish word in the English language is smorgasbord, which is in Sweden it literally means table of sandwiches.
Okay.
And metaphorically here, I guess you can talk about, in the English language, a smorgasbord of ideas would be a random collection of, ideas from this, that, and the other.
That's lovely. But that tells about the culture, right? The word encapsulates the cultural background of these words.
And I guess that's where, when two cultures meet at the sort of intersection of, in your case, French and Australian culture, there can be that sort of, creative or entrepreneurial spark. And I guess, I reflect on my own sort of entrepreneurial journey and the same thing, the Swedish-Australian, Australian-Swedish is very much part of what I do. And I think also Australia has a sense of, providing some confidence that there is it's a fertile soil or terroir for actually bringing new ideas to life.
That's true. Yeah.
I know, when I've spent time with you, and also when we've, digitally stalked you in our research, you talk about, the parfumerie d'idées.
Yes, parfum d'idées. Yes.
And my French is not perfect, but the perfume of ideas, is that how we would translate it?
Yeah, and that's what I felt was strong enough to start a candle brand, was that my perfumes weren't about a rose bouquet or a vanilla and pear. It wasn't just flat fragrance. It was memories or concept. For instance, I've got a candle called Obscurity, and it smells like the dark side of Australia with burnt wood and cedar wood. And on the opposite side, I've got one called Strangeness. And, I don't think there was a candle before me that was called Strangeness.
So these are like concepts and ideas translate into a perfume. Scent.
Exactly. Another one is called Sainty, which literally means holiness. And this one smells like 1,000 cut flowers, because Saint Teresa, that is the inspiration behind the candle, was the patron of florists. I mean, she still is. She will forever be, from the Catholic culture. And so it's the idea of holiness again. It's not just a flower candle. And then that's why also when I collaborate with brand to bring out their values, we've got a candle coming. I don't know if I can speak about it yet, but for Mother's Day, there will be a candle based on the mix of botanical ingredients that a drink maker is doing in Melbourne, especially for us. And we're doing the echoing to what you'll have in your mouth. We're doing the notes that will complete this perfectly with your nose. So again, it's the idea of synesthesia, which is the blurring of the senses together. So it's not just, a pair.
Yeah.
It's always very conceptual. And I clearly mark the concept on the box, because I want people to actually think about it as it burns, and to also an incense launching next week that you have to burn while you play Claude Debussy, Prélude à l'après-midi d'un faune. So the prelude to the afternoon of a faune, because the music is the inspiration behind that incense.
So, I mean, and I guess being surrounded by these influences and these impressions is something that can hopefully help the rest of us with our own creative sparks, right? But I'm curious, where do you? Is it memory? Is it place? Is it the French terroir? Where do you get your inspirations from?
Well, I think that I've never actually got to an adult stage in my head. And I think my secret is to be actually a child inside. And like a child, nothing can stop my imagination. And I really truly believe that, let's say that carafe has got a personality. So I always draw them with legs and wings, and they're flying. And so I think it's my view on things is very childish. And so by creating this product, I think they tap into the inner child of every adult that's buying it. So I don't know where it comes from. I just think I'm still so
still
charmed.
8 years of age in a regular Sunday in
exactly
in Languedoc-Roussillon.
Yeah, and that's why whatever come in my mind seems to be very. I've actually written children books before, and that's my world. I just love it.
Wow.
Yeah. I swim in it, and I don't want to grow up.
Yeah. And so what's kind of, I know you won't grow up, but what are you guys, beyond Maison Balzac, what are you investing your love and your creativity in at the moment and for the next few years?
Yeah, well, the house is going to be a huge focus. It's a 1950s wooden house on 3 levels with a pontoon and water access that need our touch and our love. I think it will take at least 2 to 3 years. For the first time, we're going to take it easy because we know we can do it, but we want to pace ourselves because the last 2 projects showed us that the journey is as beautiful as the end result. So we want to really, mindfully, step by step, enjoy the process of restoring the home. And it's funny because last week we sat down on the pontoon at night and Lulu turned around to us and said, Papa, Mama, I never thought a house could make me so happy. Aww. And it's only the beginning. So, we're going to nurture that and be a nest for the 3 of us. That's
nice.
the focus.
And I mean, I think, without trying to not use the term mindfulness here, but but when you've, through the last hour as we've been speaking, that sense of, mindfulness to your creative expression is really profound. Whether it's, the senses you remember, or the cadence to a day, or noticing a sound, something that's close, far away, and something that's sort of just white noise there in the middle is as you said, it's actually way to ground ourselves in a present moment. Now, the tech side of me wants to capture all of that in an app. But
that would be good.
We're not going to do that. Apparently, every entrepreneur needs their own mindfulness app now. But
awareness, could be an alternative word. It's just to be aware of what's around you.
And I think, when we had the opportunity to visit you guys, it was so profound to see our son being invited into Lulu's world of, in Australia, of, her finding crabs at low tide, or the, the mini zoo that she had created. And it's, I think, a reminder to all of us as adults to not just observe, but sort of, get back into
dive in.
that world as well.
Completely.
Thank you for generously giving of your time and energy and life story with all of us. I think there's and just bringing beauty and aesthetics and your France to the world with this little touches of Australia, and I'm heartened to see that. The sort of, the intersection of cultures can be such a, birthplace of great things.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. I take so much away from every question you have asked me, because it forced me to bring, to the forefront of my mind why I do what I do. So it was a beautiful gift. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.